thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is sponsored by Mama Mandala, who is on Facebook, Instagram and on the web. And she did, if you have seen any of our posts, the most amazing, inspired mandala specific to women, specific to our retreat, which every woman was then gifted a professional printing of to do their own mindful colouring. And also she put with that a list of a letter that she wrote to them explaining the intent and a set of questions to get into a meditative state to start to ask your deep inner self. So her work I've seen on Instagram, she does the most profound mandalas, that she makes artworks for businesses and for people and for walls and all sorts of incredible spaces, and also does mandalas with intent. So you're after a particular healing message, she intuitively then puts together a mandala for you. So please go and check her out. Rose is just the most divine soul on such an intensive mothering journey. Yeah, and I utterly honour her in that process, and the gift she gave these women was beautiful.
Yeah. And so this is part 2 of our podcast with Lael Stone. So part 1 was last week, where we looked at parenting and your inner teenager. And this week we're really looking at it from the perspective of what the teenager brings up for us in terms of sexuality and puberty. And that journey for so many women that was, often fraught with challenge and, imprinting, conditioning, how you should be in the world as a woman or shouldn't be in the world as a woman, connection to your body, all of those kinds of things.
Yes. So Lael Stone, women's healing leader, facilitator and coach, aware parenting practitioner and a birth practitioner doula who currently also runs classes in calm birth. So aboutbirth.com, you can check her out. She always says her greatest body of work is that she is a mother of 3, of 2 teenagers and 1 8-year-old emerging into that journey too. So welcome, Lael.
Thank you.
So I just feel like we need to hand over, don't you feel, Bridget?
I feel like all
right, teenagers, inner sexuality, which for women now, which is, part of our why, was getting to this point of motherhood in our 30s and 40s and going, hang on, who the fuck am I? Where has my inner seductress, temptress, sensual self gone? Because she's evaporated and I have no connection to her. And being triggered, infatuated or resentful when those triggers of sexuality come up. So, Lael, just open it up for us.
We could be here a long time. Look, I think the number one thing, in navigating teenagers is definitely around sexuality is our own innate awareness with our own sexuality and how comfortable we feel with that. So it is absolutely guaranteed that as your children start to become sexualized, it is going to push up your buttons. And if you are disconnected from your sexuality, then you are probably going to find their emerging sexuality incredibly confronting.
Yes.
And
in fact, I'd say, I wonder, if you're, the more shut down you are, the more they'll almost need to express it to get you to...
Yeah, look, potentially, or they'll hide it, because, again, what they're getting is around sexuality is that shame, or it shouldn't be hidden, And, look, it was very, very important to me, even though I had really quite open parents there, and it was never spoken about. There was a sense of shame with sexuality, when I was growing up, and I was absolutely adamant that I was not going to do that for my own children. So, of course, the work is you have to do the work on yourself. You have to work on how you feel about sexuality. You have to work on your relationship to your sexuality, how intimate you are with yourself, with your partner, all those kind of things. So, I think, it first started bubbling for me when my son was probably, maybe he was about 12, 13, starting high school, and body starting to change, those kind of things. And something came up one day. Oh, I know what it was. It was absolutely beautiful. He'd just got a phone, and so, we were talking about using this phone safely and those kind of things. And at some point I was looking on his phone, or I had his phone for something, and I saw that he had Googled the word boobs. And so then what had popped up is... pictures of girls with boobs, right, and just different names. And so I said to my husband, okay, it's time. Like, we need to talk to him about porn and we need to, he's curious, right? So let's have these conversations. But the initial thing that came up for me was fear straight away, because I went, oh my God, he's going to be searching porn and he's going to be, having rough sex with girls. And, I completely freaked out. So what I did is I turned to one of my beautiful mentors, Saida Desolé, and I had a Skype session with her going, oh my God, I think my son's going to be looking at porn. And she was on the other end of Skype just looking at me, laughing, giggling. And she said to me, I want you to remember that the imprint of his sexuality has actually already happened. And he said the imprint of sexuality on children happens when they're little, by watching what happens in your house. So when you are in a loving relationship where you show affection to each other, where you giggle, you cuddle, you're kind, you touch each other, that is what they learn, what sexuality actually is. So she said on some level the work is already done. So I actually had kind of exhaled and went, okay. And she said, porn is porn. It's okay. It's just one part. It's one part of it. And he needs to explore these edges around what that might be. But then you also need to give him other ways to, other learning, So there's nothing wrong with it. But it's actually when they become addicted to it. It's when they see that that's actually what sexuality looks like. But you have to remember that you model what healthy sexuality is. So my husband and I are very, very affectionate to each other. We kiss and cuddle a lot in front of the kids. We're always really, really intimate together.
How long have you been together, Lael?
Well, we've been together for nearly 20 years now. It's our 14th wedding anniversary yesterday, but we've been together for a long time.
This is going to be part of that conversation, is that you as a woman now feel that your relationship is more alive and that you are more alive and within that relationship than even what you were right back at the beginning of it.
Completely.
So it gives this complete reframe on the deadening of our sexuality, doesn't it?
Oh, look, sexuality, like any part of our lives and development, takes work, And, look, when I had young kids and I was breastfeeding, sexuality was just so far down the list of survival, modes that we were in that it didn't even pop up. And it wasn't until actually I finished breastfeeding my third daughter where I actually hit this point and went, okay, I feel like I've finished the intense job of mothering, of birthing babies and feeding babies. So now here I am. I'm like, this 34-year-old, 32-year-old woman. And if this is as good as it gets, I'm feeling pretty ripped off, right? Because this can't be as good as it gets. And I actually had to redefine what sexuality was as a woman who was married and had 3 kids. And so I start looking around for references and I can't find anything because our society paints sexuality as being 19 and hot, and I'm like, well, that's actually not what I want. That's what I thought I was, but that's actually not embodied. So then that actually sent me on this whole journey of going, well, what does that actually look like for me? So I had to do a lot of work on reclaiming what that sexuality was. I almost had to go back to being a teenager myself and actually re-identify what it was to be a woman who was sexually expressed and connected with herself.
I just feel like there's just an explosion out of me of the perfection of you being at this point in your life doing what you're doing, which is the beginning of this mission of, with all of your women's healing background, the idea of guiding women through the emergence of their sexuality with the mirror of their children is such total perfection in your skill set, which is why we have you here.
Thank you, darling. Thank you for that honouring. Look, and I think the start of it really, again, was me kind of going, okay, well, what is my sexuality? And then as my son started to move into puberty, it fired up again. Well, how do I feel about all that? What does that look like? Now, interestingly, I found it really challenging as my son started to move into puberty and started to become sexualised. My husband, no issue whatsoever. He was kind of like, yeah, it's all good. He was chatting with him about it. I had my buttons pushed. Now, when my daughter is going through puberty into sexuality, my husband is completely just all over the shop, right? And I am totally like, yes, we are having...
But would you be like that had you not had to go back into your own journey and come to where you are now?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think, though, what I found that with my son what came up for me is he going to treat women okay? Like, I really want him to be respectful in that.
So back to that conversation where he's Googled boobs and you're on the verge of porn and what on earth that turns into. Yeah. And your reframe is porn is okay, and the version of it's just part of a spectrum of sexuality. The issue with pornography, thank you, is when it becomes addictive and that's the only way to stimulate arousal.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what was then the reframe and the conversation that you had with him around what pornography was and what real spectrum of sensuality was?
So that was just candid conversations, and it's not been one talk, it's been many talks. Like, we talk about sex a lot at the dinner table. Like, even my 8-year-old will chime in on the conversations, and she knows about how sex works and all those kind of things now, because we actually just went, we have to normalize this, completely normalize what sexuality is. So we just started to open up conversations around sex and being intimate. I mean, there's stuff that we talk about with our son that we don't with our daughters, just because he's a bit older. But, my husband has had some absolutely beautiful conversations with him around, what it's like to be with a girl and where he's at with that, and masturbation and all those kind of things. Really candid, down-to-earth conversations where they've just normalised it, And I've found, particularly with my son, he's probably a little bit more comfortable talking about it with my husband than he is with me. But there's times where we'll actually be really light and fun about it. There's times where we've been, I remember in the kitchen one day, we kind of had him bailed up and we started talking about contraception or something, and my husband and I laughing at him going, it's not on. If it's not on, buddy, you got this. And he's like, I've got it. Have you got your condoms? He's like, yeah. I mean, I don't think he's not having sex. He just told us he's not having sex yet. But, the joy and jokes around what it is and the respect and, there's a really pretty nasty some goings on out there in the world at the moment of, stuff, with lots of different parties that we don't need to go into about what's happening. And we speak to him about that. What would you think about that? And he goes, well, that's really disrespectful. And, my husband would say, just think about your sisters. If someone was treating them like that, how would you feel? And he goes, that's not okay. And, so we have lots of candid conversations about why children, perhaps teenagers, do those things, what they're trying to get out of it, the peer pressure. Again, it's normalising these conversations to just go, this is what it is. So I want to look at
this word normalising. So when you're saying normalising, what does that mean to you?
It means just talking about it without the charge of uncomfortableness of, oh, this is awkward, or, it's just like, how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? We've shared experiences from our own, when we lost our sexuality, when we lost our virginity, we've talked to our son about, when we've had conversations about that. I mean, one of the big things we talk a lot about in our family is about menstruation, periods. Again, I've made that so normal and real. My son is completely all over that. Even when I'm bleeding, he will see that and he'll go, do you need a hot pack, Mum? Do you want a cup of tea? Like, he totally honours that. That's my time to be still and quiet. Do you need anything?
Which that's very different, right, to the way society treats women and periods, which is very much a, not to be talked about, not to be seen. Yes, keep that away from your child. Yes,
completely. But it's, again, I mean, I was really adamant that I didn't want there to be any shame around our bodies, around any shame around our sexuality, and I mean, I don't know if this is just because we have a small house and only one bathroom, but we are all still quite naked in front of each other. And I have teenagers and they're naked, and they've got big bits all going on everywhere, right? But there's a comfortableness in it because there's no embarrassment or shame, or that's what it is. There's also respect, around it too. But I think that, I mean, first and foremost, it comes back to you as a parent. How are you feeling with it? If you're feeling really uncomfortable about sex or those kind of things, then you need to explore those edges as to why. Look, and most of us, again, we grew up without good sex education. We grew up without a really strong foundation in, sexuality or femininity and all those kind of things. So, of course, we're bringing all our own crap to it. So the more work you can do on yourself, the more work you can explore those edges, and the easier it actually becomes with your children to again normalise what it actually looks like for them.
So when you talk about respectful sex and the parameters of pornography, how specifically did you lay that out in terms of how were you actually relaying that concept of intimacy and respect? And
so we talked about, you've looked at porn, and he's like, yeah, and we're like, okay, so do you know that they're actors and they're doing this and that, and that's what it is, and that's not reality? We talk about how they don't have much pubic hair. He's like, yeah, like just, that's what it is. So, and again, we say that, sexuality and sex is about, intimacy, but it's also about pleasure. Like, here's the thing too that we don't talk about with our children, that sexuality is about pleasure, and I want you to have pleasure and I want you to have joy within it, but I also want you to be really respectful within that. So, I mean, that's a big thing that we don't talk to our kids about, that your body is actually a vessel for pleasure. You know, I had this conversation with my 12-year-old the other day about that, because we were talking about different elements of sex, and she was saying to me, I just don't understand why people would want to have sex. So she's not at that point yet. Yeah. And I'm like, well, because it actually feels pretty good. And she goes, I just don't get it. And I'm like, it's fine. You don't need to get it, darling. One day you'll change your mind. But I really want to offer you that your body is meant to be used for pleasure and joy, and that, you know, it's amazing. I mean, it's there to make babies, but it's also about to be fully explored, and that's your job to do that. And then if you feel like you want to share that with someone, then that's your choice, and it's got to be a big yes for you. And we just, again, these conversations often happen at bedtime, you know, sometimes when you get those beautiful gold things. So often we'll lay in bed at night and, you know, we'll just talk about little bits and pieces about that. And particularly with my daughter, because she is really moving through puberty now, we talk a lot about menstruation, we talk a lot about what the body's designed to do, you know, hormones, all those kind of things. And really quite beautifully is because my girls share a room, her 8-year-old sister's there, she's just hearing everything and she's just all over it. Again, it's just a normal, this is what your body does. You know, there's no shame around it. It's who we are. And again, if we want our children to be, you know, conscious beings, sexuality is a big part of that. You know, I think one of the biggest things that I see with teenage girls is they trade their sexuality for love or acceptance, you know, and I really, really, really...
Do you see that in your son's peers?
Not so much with his group that he hangs around in. His group of mates are all really focused on sport. So there has to be a pretty damn special girl to catch his eye to make him want to hang out with her more than play soccer. So I find in his group that's not really so there, but I think in a lot of who I've spoken to, you know, that is going on a lot.
And do you see a background story there around their environment or...
Absolutely, yeah. So again, I think, and Steve Biddulph writes a lot about this in Raising Girls too, about that often girls will use sexuality when they don't have a good, strong male role model in their life, when they don't have a passion or other male role models who see their worth and what they're contributing to the world, you know, then they'll use their bodies and sexuality to try and find that place to fill themselves up, you know, and bargain in that sense. So I do think that sometimes when we're not having that stability in the family, you know, which sometimes just doesn't exist because it's life, you know, that's what girls will actually look for.
And also for girls, you know, there's often so much self-worth or poor self-worth tied up in those years, and there's a desperate yearning for acceptance. Yes. And, you know, sex and exploring your body or sharing your body with somebody else can be, you know, a really surefire way to have that perception of acceptance.
Yes, completely. Yeah, look, I think that, I mean, sex is one of those big topics. There's so many different layers involved with it. I mean, again, coming back to, I think that ideally what we want as parents when we're talking with our teenagers is to have communication, is to have connection. Connection's the key. So, you know, your kids know when you feel uncomfortable or you're charged around something. They just know it. They can feel it in their energy. So the clearer you can get around your own crap around it, the easier it will be to help navigate what that actually looks like. And a bit, you know, and everyone I've spoken to on this topic, the one thing that always comes back is about normalising it, is about, it's not a talk you have about sex, but it is about folding that into everyday conversations. It's talking about, you know, just different elements of what, you know, our sexuality is, you know.
I mean, as you mentioned in last week's podcast too, it's not just about the words, it's the life you embody.
Yes.
It's what you demonstrate and live.
Yes.
Yes. Because you know, words can be really empty if there's not anything backing them up.
Yes. I mean, if you think about the best thing you can do for your family is get your relationship sorted. Like, fall in love with your partner deeply, you know, be intimate, find that connection, because that ripple of what you guys have as far as love and openness, it filters into your kids. That's what they absorb in their pores, is what, you know, relationship looks like. That's who they go and find for their future mate, you know, is that dynamic that we've got. So when, you know, kids grow up in a family where there's no touching, there's no intimacy, you know, then there's no gauge for actually what that healthy intimate relationships are meant to look like, you know. So again, then they look for it, and the only place really that's offering information is the internet. And we know that necessarily doesn't, you know, not necessarily gives you the right information.
So if a woman came to you and had that story, let's say that was her upbringing, either a split family or a family where there wasn't much love and intimacy within the mother-father relationship, and she grew up in that. and now she's where she is, who knows what her relationship currently is, and she has a teenager there. What would you say to her?
So I would just start with simply being with yourself. How do you feel around your sexuality? How do you feel being a sexual being right now? What is it that you feel you never got when you were a kid that you wanted? Because that's the number one thing when we're looking at any process work that you're doing, is that our wounds are usually what we never got or what we felt we missed out on. So it's about going back to that and going, okay, well, nobody ever really sat down and talked to me about what this was meant to be like. No one ever told me that pleasure was mine to have, or no one ever told me that menstruation is actually an amazing thing that your body's doing. So I'd start with the journey of yourself, and that can even just be journaling how you feel about your sexuality. And then it's about, like anything with parenting, it's about trying to find ways to connect with your children, and once the connection's there, start talking about these topics, start normalizing what that could feel like within it. But again, the more work you can do on yourself, the more freedom you have to then be with your kids around all these issues and topics within it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, totally. Do you talk differently about sexuality and how to emerge into that from your son to your daughter?
Look, I do, in the sense of that, because I'm not male, and I feel like I am not an authority to say to my son what that should be like. That I feel like that's really more, my husband has had that really strong connection with him around what that could be like.
This is another point I'm fascinated by, having a son entering that kind of life-changing phase. Yep. Is my reality check of I know nothing about it. So what do you do in that perspective? Like, I have obviously a husband who to some extent can step up, but to some extent is really shut down to even really getting past the giggliness of an erection.
Yeah.
So if you are either a single mother raising a son, or like me, wanting to, impart this body of knowledge and awareness around awakening and sensuality and sexuality onto your son, but with not and I grew up with a sister, so like literally no body of knowledge about boys. How do you even start that?
So, I mean, for me, I'd be having this conversation with your husband about how do you feel around that? How does he feel around that? What was it like for him going through puberty? What do you think you wished you had known? Those kind of things. I mean, just starting with conversations with him about that. I would, again, include beautiful little snippets when you have dinner together around just normal body functions, so even if it's around erections kind of thing, if isn't it, however it comes up, even isn't it amazing how your body does this thing? So, as you get older, this is what happens with your blood flow. And even to Jade, do you know what happens soon? You get all these hormones that make your boobs grow bigger, just normal little things without any charge. And then giggling. I mean, laughter is a really great way to dissolve tension around, these topics. So I would kind of start with just normalizing conversations. There's some really great books you can get for kids around their bodies. I'd get them, leave them lying around. They'll look at them.
I've just bought a Secret Girls Business and Secret Boys Business.
Yeah, great books. So good books to have just laying around that they'll pick up and read if you need to.
My daughter takes it everywhere with her.
Beautiful.
She hasn't
She's
put
curious.
it down yet.
Yes.
My son hides in his bedroom to read it, and then if I happen to sneak down and sit on his bed, he just has this smile.
Yeah, beautiful.
We'll get that list for you and add it to our website.
Yeah. I mean, they're beautiful ways to do that. Again, just normalising it, or, again, talking to your husband about how he, feels about his sexuality. Because often just in the conversation for him about being able for him to go back to being 10 or 11 and have someone hear him talk about it can create a little bit more room for him to be able to move towards more of it. I mean, the other thing too, particularly in single parent families, is to find a friend, of the opposite sex that could talk to your kids about it, who could, just be that safe place for them. I mean, often really, and Said used to talk about this in a lot of traditions, it was often the aunties and the uncles that talk to the kids about sexuality, not necessarily the parents. Because again, there can be an awkwardness when we're talking to our kids about sexuality and you're talking about it. At the same time, they're looking at you going, oh, my God, you have sex. That's really uncomfortable.
It's about also honouring the boundaries that they may feel they want to set up. So some children might not feel comfortable about it, and it's about respecting that. And if they don't want to talk to you, who is somebody around the family or that you can trust enough to facilitate that, potentially, that conversation happening.
Yes, and I think it's really important that even though it may feel a bit awkward for children, is for them to just know that there's somebody else there that they can turn to if they want to, to just go, no matter what, I'm here and I know you might not want to talk about it now, but there might be time and I'm going to just keep checking in with you, and that can often be a really safe place to have them as a guide, for that.
So if I could just break it down, so your steps really are, one, normalising sexual behaviour and sexual puberty-like stories and awakenings, so normalising that within the family home. Two would be working internally on what your sexual story is and what those teenage years and puberty years brought up for you and what you didn't receive, and then looking at giving that to yourself now, or even just opening those conversations in a journal. And then putting in conversations, or I don't want to say boundaries, but ideas of self-respect and respect of others when we're looking at engaging in sexual behaviour.
Yeah.
Is there anything I've left out there?
No, I mean, the other thing too, I think, and a big thing that I think we don't talk about is that pleasure aspect of it, you know, because I think that when the conversation about teenagers and sex, pleasure never comes up really as something that's part of it. And that's something I think that they also should know, particularly for girls, because, you know, that again, if we're using porn as our guide of what that looks like, then it's all about man's pleasure and the woman should be faking it, enjoying it. And we know that it's a whole different set of rules that happen for a female in order to, you know, awaken her body first and then even feel orgasmic, right? So I think there's a lot of young girls that don't have any idea that actually it can be about pleasure for them as well. So reframing what that actually looks like.
Have you started those conversations with your daughter?
We've had little bits and pieces about it, yeah, you know, because she's still in the kind of sex is a bit awkward and this is weird phase. As she's moving more into becoming more awake, you know, she's doing the whole finding those edges of like, oh my God, you guys have sex, that kind of grosses me out. But I also know that it's probably a good thing. And then, you know, she's like, I like boys, but there's no way I want to do that. You know, so she's really doing that beautiful, gentle, trying to figure out what it is. And I just keep reiterating to her, you know, be curious, darling, and go slowly and listen to your own body, and there is no pressure for anything, and you'll figure out how it likes. And how lovely does it feel when you see a boy that you like? Do you enjoy that sensation in your body? Amazing. Doesn't mean you have to act on it. It's just, it's a beautiful attraction. Isn't that gorgeous to feel something like that? And, you know, so I'm planting those seeds around that pleasure is your birthright, darling, you know, and that part of, as you become a sexualized being, is to know that that's actually something that is the most magnificent thing that you can do.
Oh, and I just love that. Go slow and follow your pleasure.
And I mean, I don't know for other listeners here, but this could be enormously triggering for you and how your own experience of sexuality played out, because I can totally go back to those ages. I remember I was reading Dolly magazine when I was 10. And in fact, my mum read it one day and decided it wasn't suitable anymore.
Yes.
Said I couldn't have it.
Yes.
And I wasn't allowed to read it again until I was 13 or 14.
Yes.
So that was probably a critical time that we could have had the conversation around what these things are.
Yes.
But in herself, she didn't know how to, right?
Yes.
Which is really beautiful, and I send love to her from where she was at for that.
Yeah.
But, you know, if your kids are at that stage of reading those kinds of magazines, and I guess now it's probably the internet that serves that purpose, how can you use that as a great in to start, you know, feeling around how this topic sits with your daughters?
Yes. And, you know, so much of parenting, it's not about offering advice and fixing. It's about just asking, how do you feel about that? Oh, what does that seem like to you? Oh, that could feel big. It's about, again, the spaciousness, opening the conversation, creating spaciousness to hear what is going on for them, you know, within it. I mean, we're so quick to fix all the time. That's what we do as parents. We're really like, oh, okay, I know you're upset, but we can do blah, 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 or we can, you know, this and stuff, instead of just going, oh, you feel upset. Your job is not actually to fix your children at all. Your job is just to listen to them.
And that's also your job for yourself too, because, you know, how we behave with our children is how we behave with ourselves. And if we notice we're always trying to fix our own feelings, which often we do through numbing and things like that, it's noticing that within you, because often what we're asking you to give to your kids is also what we're asking you to give to you.
Yes, completely.
And I think it talks also to this, you know, how we're all, you know, heavily emasculated too into that idea of needing to have solutions and have control and move through things quickly. It's about, you know, how can we provide the space, because the space is where that beautiful growth is.
Yes, completely. Look, and I don't think there's one set of rules to say if you do this, then this is how your children will be, because we all have such a big different backstory. There's so much different fluid elements that contribute to each unique family. I mean, for me, I always come back to the foundation, which is, am I connected with my children? Yes. And then the second thing is, am I creating spaciousness for them, which means am I there? Am I listening? Am I just reading what's going on in their stories, in their worlds? Am I seeing the opportunities that pop up to actually just guide them a little bit or tune into what's happening?
And if the answer to those questions is no, what then?
Well, then it's where you go, okay, what do I need to do to come back to creating connection with my children? What do I need to do, firstly, for myself? So that could be, I've got no time for connection, you know, I'm working and I'm stressed and I'm totally strung out. So as you guys would talk about all the time, first thing, self-care. Come back to first self-care first, so you've got actually some time and space to then connect in with your kids. Okay, then when you're connecting with your kids, am I having my buttons pushed by something's going on? Okay, so again, come back to yourself. Okay, what's this saying? What do I need to do? Do I need to talk to a friend about what's happening at the moment? Who can I download on so I can make myself more available to my children again? You know, I mean, we can get so caught up in lots of different theories and ways of doing things, and I guess over my parenting journey, I've just come back to simplifying, which is my job as a mum is to be the anchor for my children and to create space, which I know sounds really hippie, right? But it is really, to me, when we're simplifying, they're the guiding principles I come back to within it, and understanding that whenever I get my buttons pushed with my kids, that's my reaction. Something's going on for me. That's a timeout for me to think about what's happening, to go talk to a friend, to download what's going on, so then I come back and again make myself more available for my children to help them navigate what the world is within that.
So what about those parents who are feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't even have the time to create that space? In Aware Parenting, talk a little bit about this concept of present time. So it's not actually needing to necessarily be huge chunks of time, but it's about creating moments.
Absolutely. 20 minutes. Yeah. 20 minutes of laying on your kid's bed with them, you know, having your legs all wrapped over, you know, having a thumb wrestle, just going, you know, so where are you? What's going on? Eye contact, you know, those kind of things. Just create those little pockets of safety between you and your child, so the child feels anything that maybe is disconnected can melt away, then they start to open up a little bit more. You know, they say, I was reading some literature yesterday, that half an hour of present time a week can change a child's behaviour. So that's just a week, 30 minutes, right? So imagine if you have 20 minutes a day of actually just being with your kids, you know, or playing with them with something they want to play. Or those
sometimes that's also about throwing out the rules, right? Because things we can so often in our busy life, you know, rely on things like routines or certain ways of doing things.
Yes.
Sometimes the greatest joy for children is to see their parents throw out those rules, you know, and have cake for dinner, or stay up late all together, you know, on a couch watching a movie, and just to see their parents willing to join them in the play, and in the, you know, let's do things differently kind of thing.
Look, my son, again, has taught me this beautifully, because he and my husband have this absolute love of soccer, and they watch a lot of soccer from the English Premier League, which is often on at 5 o'clock in the morning, right? And so they will often get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch soccer, you know, or if there's a game on at 7, it means he'll be like late for the first part of school. And I'm like, part of me's like, come on, you got to get ready for school. And he turns around and looks at me and he goes, what's more important, Mum, that I'm sitting here with my dad? Like, and they like hug each other on the couch, like big 16-year-old boy, watching soccer, screaming at the television because they're so into it, or do I miss, you know, or missing 15 minutes of maths? And I go, yeah.
You got me.
Yeah, because he's right, because that connection is far more important in my world, and this may not be for everyone, so I totally understand if that's not, but in my bigger picture of creating humans to be in the world, you know, school is one part of the journey, it's just a small part of the journey, that connection, that love, that intimacy he's having with his father in my world is it's okay to trade that for 15 minutes of maths, you know, I'm like, yeah, go for it.
Now I just have one more question area that I wanted to delve into before we wrap up, and that's something that I've clicked into, which is the awareness for us as parents to give our kids a skill set or a tool set for dealing with the embarrassment around body change. So this concept of, you know, I'm hanging out with a group of my male and female mates, and then all of a sudden there's a different feeling in me which I didn't have yesterday, and now I have an erection in front of 14 of my friends. Or, you know, that concept about breast change and having boys pick on you in school, or having a menstruation kit to take to school because you're not sure when it's going to happen. That social emotional version of changing bodies and changing sexuality, I've started to tune into we really have to resource our kids, because if we don't, they get there, and then what the fuck happens? That's when the scarring and the trauma and the wounding happens, is when they don't already, one, have awareness, and two, have a skill set built around what they can do if they go there.
So as far as kind of females go, so I don't know if you know of Jane Bennett and her work, but she does this beautiful celebration day for girls, which I did with my daughter, which was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever done, which was I got her and 8 of her friends, and they were in grade 5 at the time, and basically Jane comes, and she's got other people who run it for as well, and they spend the whole day together, and they talk about menstruation. They make this big beautiful mandala. You know, they have this big piece of fabric, and they get all these seeds, and they make this mandala as they're talking. She talks to them about how your body works and cycles, and it's so beautiful. And then the mums come in the afternoon, and all the mums come and share their stories about when they first got their periods. So all the daughters hear about when they first got their periods. We do this crafting thing together that that you do. You gift your daughter. It's just so beautiful. We talk about kind of important women in our lives and what they've shown us. It is so magnificent and rich, and I put it out there to my daughter's friends at school. I didn't really know the mums very well, so I was a little bit like, I don't know how this is going to go.
Wondering that too. You didn't know them well.
Oh no.
So how did you, in inverted commas, sell that?
So I actually wrote this very good email, which I had to send to my friend to proofread first, to go, does it sound too hippie or is it all right? But basically I just went, look, as you would be too, I'm watching my daughter change and blossom, and I really want her to have a different experience of puberty than what I did, which was really about hidden and shame. And so there's this wonderful woman who does this thing. I sent a link to it. It would be this for the day. It really is about, helping our daughters have more awareness. And every single one of them were like, yes. I had mums running back to me going, I'm crying as I'm reading this. I don't know why I'm crying, but I am. And they absolutely all loved it.
Don't underestimate the absolute sweet spot of vulnerability and authenticity with your tribe, even if you have already not shed those layers and you're still in that group of school mums where you're still kind of sheltering a little bit who you are. Don't underestimate that point, because that's exactly what you've done, and look what was already there and came back to you.
They came to the party. They absolutely loved it. And the thing that was the most beautiful is that my daughter and all her friends did this together, right? And one of the big things Jane talked about was that you got to look after your sisters. So what would you do at school if one of you got your period? Okay, so and then they were talking about, well, if you needed me, I'd come to the toilets with you, and then I've got a little kit here and you've got that. So they started to look out for themselves. They were like looking out for each other. They were having these conversations about this is normal, and we take care of each other within that. It was so rich and beautiful. And again, something I wished I had when I was a kid, and I didn't. So again, it's completely demystified the idea around what a period is. It's just normalized the process. It's created that beautiful essence around it's a time of real gentleness for yourself as a woman. When you're bleeding and you're really low in energy, you need to look after yourself, those kind of things. So firstly, I think something like that, education, where they can do it with their friends, makes a massive difference, because you've got your tribe there together doing it. And equally, the equivalent, I don't know that necessarily as an equivalent for boys that I know of, but I think it's also talking about those conversations. So again, with my son and his mates, again, because I love these beautiful teenagers, we've had lots of conversations about sex with his mates and kissing girls. I mean, one of his best friends, this was like the highlight of my mothering career.
This has got to be good.
His beautiful good friend came home one night. They all came back to our place. I was sitting in the bedroom reading a book. So it was like 11 o'clock at night, and his beautiful friend comes in. I won't say his name. And he's this 6-foot kid, and he sits on the bed. And I go, did you have a good night, mate? And he goes, oh my God, Lael, I had my first kiss. And I was like, oh my God, that's so exciting. Was it great? And who was she? And he's this 14-year-old kid. He's not even my son, sitting on my bed, so excited. And my son walks in, and he kind of looks at me and rolls his eyes like, oh my God. Because I'm jumping up and down on the bed with this mate going, that's exciting, it was wonderful, I'm really happy for you. Beautiful, just those elements of sharing, that celebration of growth.
Look at what you've created, though, in that is that you're mothering in your capacity to hold spaciousness has moved beyond your children.
Yes, which is beautiful.
And that, like moths to the flame, they feel it and they're flocking for it.
And isn't that lovely too, to know also that kids almost do get everything that they need. So where their parents may not be able to hold the space, someone in their life is. And for some children you're playing that role, which is just so beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. You open up that space for your kids. The ones that aren't getting it somewhere else will come. They'll come towards it. For me, I've always been, I want want my house to be the place where the kids come, you know, and they hang out and everything is actually okay and safe in our house to talk about, to be. And, you know, that's been really, really important for me to hold as a mum.
So what about girls with breast development and boys in their grade 5, 6, year 7 kind of phase picking on their bodies? Yeah.
Well, again, I think it's that our job as parents is that we can't actually protect children from the world, right, and what goes on. But what you can do is listen to how your children feel about it. So that, again, it's about that connection or seeing if your child's a bit off and you're hearing, well, I feel really uncomfortable getting changed, or people are saying, thinking about my boobs growing, is to sit there and, again, your job is not to fix it, but to go, how does that feel for you, honey? Tell me about it. Let's talk about what that feels like. Why do you think those other kids are doing that? You know, and maybe because those other kids feel embarrassed themselves. How do you feel about it? Are you feeling embarrassed? Oh, okay, I understand that. Like, again, it's we can't control necessarily how that is, but what you do have control over is your ability to listen to your child coming to you with whatever's going on for them. And your job is not to fix that. I mean, half the time as parents, we want to get in there and go, those little shits, what are they doing? You know, they're hurting my child. But we can't, because it's really actually necessary for children to have these experiences. It's necessary for them to feel, that doesn't feel good for me. But then if they know they can come home and there's a safe space where they can go, this is what happened and it doesn't feel good, and they have someone to debrief that with and talk about it, then that's not a story they have to hold on to their whole life. That doesn't have to be an imprint of, I'm not okay or I'm not enough, you know. I mean, and if it is, that's going to be their journey. But your job is really still to make sure that you provide the space for them to process what happens in that big wide world, because it's not always going to be kind and it's not always going to hold our children in the way we want it to, you know, but our job is to, if we can. Does that help?
Oh, Lael. I'm in love with you.
Bless you, darling.
So I'd really like to, before we actually leave you, because now you've been with us for 2 weeks and 2 weeks of episodes, if our listeners are having a yearning and a calling to really delve into either their story as a woman or into their child's mirror, or to awakening, particularly, you know, in this teenage facet, how to shift that within themselves and their kids, is there a way for them to get into contact with you and have coaching sessions with you?
Yes, definitely. So you can reach me through my website, which is birthworkshops.com.au. So there's a section on it for aware parenting. So you can, so I do sessions over Skype, or I do sessions in person. I'm in Caulfield. So that can definitely, you know, happen for people to do that. And, you know, I'm actually working on a book that, which is really about teenagers and all these things that we're talking about, sexuality, all those kind of stuff. So that is in the process. I'm not sure when that's going to be birthed, but it will be. So
when
that's something
we will let our listeners know.
That's something that hopefully will be the book that I wish I wanted, really, you know, years ago when I started, I guess, moving through this next phase with my teenagers. It was the book I was looking for, to go, how do I guide through this to stay really conscious and aware with my children, because that's what I wanted. So it's got lots of beautiful research in it from some really amazing people who've done some incredible research about kids' brains and sexuality and all these wonderful topics. So it's got a whole combination of that and all my journeys and workings with kids and those kind of things. Yes.
Love it. Can you just say your website once again?
Yeah, it's birthworkshops.com.au.
And that's for Lael. So please get in contact with her. And to get in contact with you, Bridget?
Yes, it's suburbansandcastles.com, and our film, which is coming right up, is Future Dreaming, which is basically looking at how we can get back in alignment with what nature's calling us to do and how far we've got out of alignment. So it's a beautiful film with, love people to come along to that one if you're in Melbourne.
Fantastic.
And with Julie?
thepleasurenutritionist.com, and to get in contact with us is on Facebook, Nourishing the Mother. Please rate us on iTunes, share the podcasts that are really singing to you, and message us and email us, because we really adore hearing how those ripples are proliferating out into your world. And
until we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.